is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Treble investment in clean energy or risk a climate crisis. The world's energy watchdog issues a stark warning.
Our other headlines: more than 100 countries sign up to prevent species loss at the United Nations Biodiversity Summit.
China ramps up coal production to meet winter energy needs after prices hit record highs.
And the battle of the skies in the United States. Should airline staff be forced to have COVID vaccines?
Investment in renewables needs to triple over the next decade if a climate crisis is to be averted. That's the blunt warning from the International Energy Agency in its latest World Energy Report. The Paris-based watchdog says that while progress is being made to cut fossil fuels, the move towards clean energy around the world is far too slow, putting the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050 at risk.
Well, the IEA warns that if current energy use remains unchanged, the world will fall short of its target of net zero by 2050 by 60%. And that would mean global temperatures rising to 2.6 degrees by the end of this century. Even under policies already announced, the report says the world is still on course to miss its net zero goals by 2050 by a margin of 40%. So the IEA says investment in renewable energy will need to rise substantially by the end of this decade, with the majority of that funding going to parts of the developing world, where progress towards meeting climate goals has gone into reverse. Well, Robert Buckley is a consultant with the energy specialist Cornwall Insight. Robert, welcome. This is pretty grim reading, isn't it? Is this IEA report worse than feared?
It probably is about where we thought it would have been, given the expectations that have been talked about for the COP26 summit in Glasgow. But yes, lots to do, lots to go for. So
what's holding back renewables investments?
I think there's a general view that while targets have been set, we've perhaps not been as quick as we should around the world in implementing policies. I think you picked up on there the need for investment to be funded essentially outside the IEA nations. I think they've said that about 70% of that investment needs to go in emerging markets and developing economies. And even within those IEA nations, the developed economies, the investment frameworks perhaps aren't as clear as they should be to drive all the investment that we feel is needed.
I'm guessing that the extraordinary record prices of gas and oil that we're now seeing might accelerate investment in renewables.
I think my experience is European-based, but there's certainly a lot of funding. Even before this, there was a lot of funding wanting to go into clean energy and sustainability. This price spike we're certainly concentrating minds across a lot of Europe on the clean energy transition, as we heard from the French just the other day.
I'm guessing as customers who fill our cars with gas, diesel, petrol and pay our household fuel bills, we keep thinking, well, surely this is going to calm down soon. I mean, there is an implicit sense in this report that further price volatility is on the way.
I think further price volatility is on the way by the nature of these things. Renewables tends to be high capital cost in investment, but low marginal production cost, and it tends to be less predictable in production. So what you end up with is a smaller portion of demand potentially left for the controllable technologies which are fossil backed. And they get, they're high production costs. So these costs have to be recovered from somewhere. And of course, we've got strong expectations of increasing global demand for energy as the planet develops.
It really is difficult to imagine a more challenging background to the COP26 summit in Glasgow, what with these record prices and this pretty grim report.
Certainly from that perspective, yes, but I'm sure you guys have been reporting on the comments made by President Putin and other comments that have been made in the run-up to COP26. I mean, I'm no global political expert, but there does seem to be a lot of positioning going on ahead of that summit. Hopefully, it will lead to a successful outcome.
Robert, you've neatly led us on to President Putin. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Robert Buckley.
Thank you.
Well, President Vladimir Putin has denied that Russia is using gas supplies as a weapon and said that Moscow is willing to explore what more can be done to help ease the European gas crisis. He made the remarks at the Russia Energy Week conference in Moscow, where he also pledged that Russia would reach net zero emissions by 2060 at the latest. Our correspondent Julia Chapman is in Moscow.
This is the first time that President Vladimir Putin or anyone in the Russian government has mentioned a net zero target for emissions. President Putin said that the government was already taking steps to adapt its economy towards that eventuality. It's got a very long way to go. In order to reach net zero, it will have to cut emissions by 65% from where they are today. It's much more ambitious than the last climate pledge that Russia made just 2 years ago, which was to reduce emissions by 2030, 30% compared to 1990 levels. That actually allowed for emissions to rise from where they are today. So making a net zero pledge is very significant from Russia, the fourth biggest polluter in the world. And President Putin says that the country is taking climate change very seriously after years of accusations that the government wasn't ambitious enough and didn't see this as a major concern. But Russia's economy is heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and it's going to take some significant restructuring in order to get it to move away from that and towards renewable sources and other sources of income in its economy. President Putin also mentioned the European energy crisis that has been ongoing in recent weeks. He maintained that Russia has met all of its contractual demands for gas supplies to Europe, and he said that the issues that were going on there were systematic ones that have emerged over the past decade as European countries move towards renewable energy sources. He pointed out that Russia doesn't have a similar problem because it doesn't have as many renewables in the mix, and here energy prices are indeed much lower than they are in Europe. But he also said that Russia was prepared to send more energy to Europe and announced that Gazprom, the state energy company, had already sent 10% more energy to Europe. So he was very adamant that nobody should be politicizing the issue of gas supply. Of course, many European countries have been concerned and reluctant to depend more heavily on Russia for their energy. But he says that Russia will continue to be an important source of energy in the European mix going forward. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
So what to do about spiralling international gas prices? Well, the European Commission says it'll explore joint gas purchasing among member countries. The EU's executive branch has announced a raft of measures for countries to adopt to help households and businesses. Let's talk to our correspondent Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt. So what has Brussels prepared to offer?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, with the wholesale price of gas rising 250% since January, pressure has been growing on Brussels to really address this crisis, because more and more each day, it's no longer a crisis knocking on Europe's door. It is here to stay, especially as we head into the winter months. And so pressure has been growing on them on them to address this crisis, and they've released this package of measures. But interestingly enough, it is simply really just a book of ideas and proposed policies. There's no actual concrete decisions to come out of this. And we expect when the EU leaders meet next week, that will really be the point where decision-making, at least in terms of short-term decisions to address this crisis, will have to be made. The EU energy minister was really selling a short and long-term approach to addressing this crisis. In the short term, as I mentioned, it will head to the EU leaders, but possible things that they could eventually enact here are protecting European consumers by really introducing a price structure that is generous to them, as in it allows them to offset some of these higher prices, introduce energy checks or energy vouchers, and also really allowing this financial support to continue into the winter and up until the next part of next year. It's really, to be clear here, a list of what member states can and cannot do. In terms of long-term approaches to address this crisis, well, this is really playing to Brussels' strengths here, because they will be able to integrate some aspects of the Green New Deal to allow for them to see that this type of crisis never happens again, or it doesn't happen as much as they can prevent it from happening. So that would include things like increasing storage for renewable energy, but also, as you mentioned in the introduction to this report, the idea of building a European energy reserve that is dedicated to gas and allowing member states to buy into it so that they have these reserves to tap in case this happens in the next 5 years.
Ryan, we've seen UK energy companies, energy providers go bust. What's the picture in the EU? Are they struggling to hang on?
Well, Jamie, when we spoke a little bit earlier, it was a struggling picture, but it seemed like European energy providers were so far hanging on. But we've just gotten in the last hour news that one of Germany's energy provider, gas provider, Optima, has gone bust. They will be dissolved and their energy contracts will be handed over to another provider. In recent days, we've heard at least 3 German providers have had to go into an emergency mode, meaning that they will not be taking on new customers, but they will only be providing energy to those who have already signed up. I think it is likely that we continue to see energy companies continue to move in this type of direction as they attempt to balance their bottom line with the current supply chain demands.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thank you very much.
China will ask steel mills in nearly 30 cities to cut production for 4 months starting from November. Companies will take turns implementing the shutdowns. China's industrial authorities say the move is to meet the target of reducing steel output and lowering the level of air pollutants during the peak heating season. Meanwhile, China says it will increase coal production to meet increasing energy needs ahead of winter. The country's been grappling with power shortages after flooding in a coal-producing province disrupted production. The power crunch has seen domestic coal prices hitting record highs and imports surging 76% in September. David Hunter is a specialist in energy management. I asked him what caused the coal shortage in China and how long it will take before it eases.
So I don't think China is alone in supply shortages, but there have been issues around weather-related issues around mines having to temporarily close, relating to flooding and other natural issues at a time when energy demand, as in many countries around the world, has been increasing, and that's put a bit of a pressure on supply. And with many countries around the world, including China, significant importers of energy as well, that's also increased demand for imports at a time when many countries are looking for those supplies, and with that comes cost pressures and security of supply pressures.
And China has made some changes to its energy policy in recent days to help with energy security. When do you think this will start to make a difference?
It's difficult to tell when you're talking about situations like the weather and so on, and really at a global level no one really knows what's going to happen to commodity prices and supply, not just of coal but also natural gas and oil and so on. So these are challenges that are being faced by countries around the world. And obviously any country, energy security of supply and having the energy to drive industry and supply homes is incredibly important, but also the environmental aspect is really important to the world as well.
One of the measures was removing the price cap for commercial customers. How much difference might that make?
Globally, where we've seen market price-driven changes, the prices of gas and coal have increased very significantly, and less so oil. And obviously with electricity prices as well, because they're linked to gas and to coal as well, there's a clear impact there, because we burn gas and coal to create electricity. So in Europe, we see very significant price responses and industry facing challenges as a result of that, and also domestic consumers further down the road. So price rises do have an impact across the piece.
So how will the increased need for coal that China's experiencing impact its climate pledges to reduce emissions and cut its reliance on coal?
I think, obviously, where there are short-term demand pressures and governments look to manage energy security, that's clearly an important part. But obviously, in terms of the climate change commitments globally and the climate change agenda, the energy transition is something that we need to go through, and countries across the world are investing significantly in renewable energy and energy efficiency as well, and also digitizing economies to make better use of energy. So all of that really still needs to happen. I think, generally speaking, where we see shortages or increasing demand and tight supply for fossil fuels, generally that's a signal that in the long term it's important to continue on that decarbonisation agenda, because ultimately the world will want to reduce its reliance on fossil fuels in the long term.
Trading on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange was cancelled as Typhoon Kampotsu hit the financial district. At least one person has died. Schools and businesses were also shut after the storm warning alert was raised to number 8. That's the third highest on the scale. From Hong Kong, CGTN's Anne Cheng.
Well, Typhoon Kampotsu hit its peak in Hong Kong early this morning, but it has departed away from Hong Kong and, has made landfall in Hainan. About 2 hours ago, the typhoon's number 8 warning signal was downgraded to a number 3, which means that strong winds will be blowing near the sea level with a sustained speed of about 41 to 62 kilometers per hour. Now, the number 8 signal had been in force for almost 24 hours since yesterday afternoon, and that's surpassing Tropical Storm Lion Rock's longest storm record with a level 8 signal since 1978. Lion Rock hit the city just 4 days ago with a level 8 that lasted for 22 hours. The Amber rainstorm warning signal, which was issued in the afternoon, has also been canceled. I'm here outdoors now in Wan Chai district, and there's no rain and winds are relatively calm. Traffic behind me is also relatively smooth ahead of a public holiday tomorrow, unlike the typical jam. Before this, however, it had been raining heavily throughout the day with gusty winds, and in total there are 10 cases of flooding in areas like Lei Yu Moon and Hang Fa Chun. There are also 72 cases of fallen trees, but no reports of landslides. Now, at least 20 people have been injured because of this typhoon, while one man has died after he lost control of his motorcycle while on the road and crashed into a lamppost. And the city has mostly been brought to a standstill. Schools have been suspended since yesterday, and while today's stock market trading was also canceled, and the Legislative Council also postponed its weekly meeting, which means that the second reading for new bills on issues like rent control for subdivided flats will be postponed to next week. Meanwhile, most public transport like buses and ferries have resumed, but on a limited basis. Now, some people have commented that this time the winds aren't as strong as they thought it would be, especially compared to Lion Rock. Nevertheless, now that the typhoon has passed, the city is expected to start resuming business as usual on Friday after tomorrow's public holiday.
Anne Cheng reporting from Hong Kong.
Rome is cracking down on wild boars, bringing chaos to the city. A public spending crunch affecting waste collection has led to hordes of boars searching the streets for food. Some have even been pictured on social media harassing shoppers as they leave supermarkets. To see the full story, europe.cgtn.com.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how will the globe-trotting, petrol-guzzling speed merchants of Formula One motor racing go green? The boss of Williams, next.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe, and a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV, online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Should airline staff be compelled to have COVID vaccinations? Well, American Airlines and Southwest Airlines say they will both defy a Texas state order which bans businesses from enforcing COVID-19 vaccines for staff. That order conflicts with a mandate from US President Joe Biden that requires airline employees to be vaccinated against coronavirus by December. Well, CGTN's correspondent John Terrett is in New York. So, John, this is a case of airlines versus the governor. What's going on?
Yeah, well, it absolutely is. And I've told you before on the program, absolutely everything in America is political in a way that it really isn't in other parts of the world, and not really in the UK and even mainland Europe, from what I remember. But here, absolutely everything comes back to whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, what those two parties' political views are. So here we have Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. Okay, he's a second-term governor, and he has his eye on the White House in 2024. Now, John, we understand. It's all just fallen into place, hasn't it? Because Greg Abbott wants to run for the White House, and he will either do that as a solo politician or behind President Donald Trump if he runs again, and all the signs are that he will run again. He was up in Iowa at the weekend, which is the place you go when you're about to do a presidential run. So what you have to understand is that President Biden, who's a Democrat, has put into place this mandate for vaccines and masks, particularly vaccines for all federal workers and for companies who have more than 100 employees. And Governor Abbott is saying, we're not having any of that, just like Governor DeSantis has said in Florida. Governor Abbott says, no, we're not doing that. And on Monday, he signed a ban, basically, on such mandates. So now in comes two of Texas' biggest employers. Southwest Airlines, which is based in Dallas in Texas, shares down 2% at the moment, and American Airlines, which is based in the next-door city of Fort Worth, shares down 4% at the moment. And the thing is, you see American Airlines around the world because it's an international carrier. Southwest Airlines you don't see around the world. It just flies around the United States. It's a low-cost carrier. But they are saying, look, our lawyers are telling us, you know, that the federal mandate, as imposed by Joe Biden, outweighs the domestic, well, the local one in Texas, as espoused by Governor Greg Abbott. And so we will go on now trying to get our staff vaccinated by the deadline in December. So it's a rather embarrassing situation where Governor Abbott is now facing an all-out rebellion from two of his state's biggest and most high-profile employers. Now, just finally, it also comes on the 6th day of disruption for Southwest Airlines, which is a low-cost carrier. They have had thousands of cancellations here, which I fully realize doesn't affect people overseas. But it's a big story here. They had 2,000 cancellations on Sunday. They had 300, nearly 400 on Monday. They had 7% of their service cut on yesterday and on Tuesday. And the pilots are being blamed. The pilots, it is said, have been working to rule and failing to turn up, pulling sick days, because they don't want to be told by their bosses to get vaccinated and to wear masks and this sort of thing. Now, the pilots say that's not true. The number of sick outs was no more than it is normally. And actually, the real problem with the cancellations was the IT infrastructure that Southwest badly needs to update. But it just goes to show you the political divide in this country regarding something like a vaccine mandate and the fact that it will all end up in the courts, as it so often does.
John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
China's exports grew unexpectedly last month as global demand offset some pressure on factories struggling with power shortages and supply bottlenecks. Outbound shipments rose 28% in September to $305 billion. That's slightly faster than the increase logged in August and above some economists' forecasts. The country's imports also rose last month, but analysts say China's power rationing in September may not have affected those exports yet.
China can handle the indebted property giant Evergrande. That's according to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF said China has the fiscal, legal and institutional tools to face the crisis, but warns that risks still remain. The company, which is struggling with more than $300 billion of debt, missed a third round of bond payments due on Monday.
Apple has added China's BOE technology to its list of main screen suppliers for the latest iPhone. BOE began shipping a small number of screens for the iPhone 13 last month and is now in the process of final testing for approval. BOE had already been making screens for repaired and refurbished iPhones.
Competition in Germany's auto market from the likes of Tesla has pushed Volkswagen to accelerate plans to transform its main plants to make electric vehicles. But German media is reporting that VW's CEO has issued a stark warning about job losses if the transition to EVs is too slow, saying the company could lose as many as 30,000 jobs.
And staying with cars, screaming engines, the stink of fuel and an international carbon footprint you could see from space. When you think of carbon neutral, the sport of motor racing may not immediately come to mind, but all is changing.
The Williams Formula One racing team has committed to becoming climate positive by 2030. Well, that means removing more carbon from the atmosphere than it produces within less than a decade.
Williams is setting targets to reduce carbon emissions for travel and energy consumption at its headquarters in the UK. It also plans to cut waste and water usage and eventually produce its own energy. I've been talking to Williams' chief executive, Jos Capito.
Today is a very important day for Williams Racing as we announce a sustainability strategy that is really forward-looking and with a final objective to be climate positive in 2030. And, you know, the sport has to develop a lot. It developed a lot in the past. And I'm in motorsport now for 60 years nearly, and I've seen through all the decades. And where I've seen where motorsport developed also on efficiency, it made tremendous steps. And it's now to do even more steps as I'm a racer by heart, and I want to see motorsport long term. And that's why we have to move on technology forward to make it even more sustainable than it already is.
The challenge is, I guess, that you end up with a sport that ends up being very dull. You end up watching something that sounds like a washing machine racing around a circuit.
No, I think that it's the scare that the motorsport fans might have. I don't think so. There are so many technologies that have to be developed, and I think the world should not look on just one solution. There are more solutions. There are technical solutions for cars that is, of course, the battery electric is very important, but also there is other technology like the hybrid technology with e-fuels, sustainable fuels that will still make a noise. I think the core motorsport fans will still hear a noise, and the motorsport being sustainable.
How are you going to do it then?
Williams has a great heritage in bringing Formula One high technology to other applications. For example, in the past, and it's not widely known, Williams developed an air screen for the fridges of supermarkets that it's based on Formula One aerodynamics that keeps the cold air in the fridge without having these sliding doors, and it reduces the electricity consumption by about 30%. And I think there is much more to come from Formula One, because Formula One is on the edge of technology. And it's on lightweight, it is on composite. Well, it's all very important for the future to solve the problems the planet have. And I think the high technology of Formula One has a lot to offer for other commercial applications.
Okay, well, is there any other transferable technology from your amazing racing cars that might be applicable to the ordinary cars that we use to go and do the shopping?
Yeah, for sure there is. When you see the engines running now, they're highly efficient. And what I mentioned before, the technology of composite, carbon fiber, the reusability, the recycling of these materials, the lightweight. For the cars in the future, lightweight is very important. It's actually now. And as Formula One has to be so efficient with their cars, there's a lot of technologies on efficiency that can be put into our future cars.
Do you ever think that perhaps we should simply give up our love affair with motorsport, with motor racing, given the state we're in, both environmentally and in terms of the congestions in our cities in every country in the world? There might be some people watching who might well say, you know, this is a bit 1970s.
No, I absolutely don't believe this. Where you see what Formula One and motorsport can deliver on solutions. And also, if we, as Williams Racing, we live by example and we show these kind of opportunities that the high technology of Formula One offers. We have, every 2 weeks, we have millions and millions of people watching our sports and our racing. And we have the opportunities to communicate. And we have the opportunity to influence the fans to maybe change a bit in their behavior. And if we can achieve that it's a huge success for Formula One in the future.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Stop deforestation and plant more trees. The urgent action we all need to take on biodiversity.
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a third jab.
There are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year.
France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
If a spike necessitates another lockdown,
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
billions of years of evolution on Earth. Different life forms sharing one planet, from single cells to complex ecosystems. They integrate, split, prosper, and perish. They affect our planet and are in turn affected by this diversified world of which humans are a part. It's time to build a shared future for all on Earth. Tune in to CGTN's special coverage on our global commitment to the planet.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Treble investment in clean energy or risk a climate crisis. The world's energy watchdog issues a stark warning.
And China ramps up coal production to meet winter energy needs after prices hit record highs.
More than 100 countries say they'll work together to tackle the world's biodiversity crisis.
They've signed a declaration at the United Nations conference in China. Tao Yuan reports.
A call of action reaffirming global political commitment to tackling the biodiversity crisis. The Kunming Declaration was adopted by China and more than 100 other countries.
All of the parties of the Convention for Biological Diversity, and basically that's all countries in the world, except for the USA, have agreed to this declaration. And what the declaration says is that biological diversity loss is a defining challenge of this decade.
What the Kunming Declaration states is a commitment to making it work, to make sure there are financial mechanisms in place so that the targets are actionable and achievable, that they can build the capacity that is necessary for developing countries to catch up and meet the targets, but to also make sure we look at the explicit mechanisms that are responsible for biodiversity loss.
The declaration calls on parties to mainstream nature conservation in policymaking, emphasizing solidarity and coordinated action. It says many countries are calling for increasing protected areas. 30% of land and sea areas by 2030 is the goal.
Not all countries are on board with that, but for us as an environmental NGO, we really want to see that actually happen. The science tells us that we need to protect large parts of our planet in order to protect biodiversity effectively.
China's Minister of Ecology and Environment, Huang Renqiu, said the declaration is only an expression of political will, not an international agreement. The hope is for it to lay the ground for a binding pact for the next decade, to be agreed upon during a second and final phase of the conference next spring.
The way that these things are developed is multiple rounds of discussion and debate by parties around the world to finesse literally every single word. What we see now is a very comprehensive framework which addresses the drivers of biodiversity loss, is inclusive and engaging across society, including things like indigenous communities, has firm commitments in terms of area coverage, but also tackles the explicit drivers of biodiversity loss, like supply chains.
The last time the world made such an agreement was 10 years ago during the COP10 conference in Aichi, Japan. A decade later, an evaluation concluded that the world has basically failed to meet any of the 20 targets set in that agreement to slow biodiversity loss. So the key words this time around, ambition, but also, more importantly, implementation. Taoyuan, CGTN, Kunming.
The British ambassador to China, Caroline Wilson, has been explaining how China and the UK can cooperate on biodiversity. She's been talking to our correspondent, Meng Xingsheng.
The recent announcement by China, by President Xi, to stop the overseas financing of coal projects is extremely important, and we look forward to more progress around those. I think the issues of actually goals around forests, I know, and land use and commodities is very important. So I know that this week there is a session going to be looking at the impacts globally of eco-civilization. Now that suggests to me that there's an acknowledgement that China, as well as other countries, we all have a global responsibility. It's not just what we do within our borders, it's what we do, the impacts we have outside our borders, as we saw from the decision on coal financing. So I think that's another area where we can do a lot more together.
Well, as we've been hearing, the United Nations Biodiversity Conference is underway in Kunming in China with a focus on protecting wildlife, plants and habitats. Part of that protection involves securing the genetics of plants that are in danger of becoming extinct, and seed banks play a crucial role in that. CGTN's Andrew Wilson has been to visit the world's largest in England.
In the Sussex countryside, there's a bank taking deposits and investing for our future.
Smallest seeds in the world, biggest seed in the world. So it's not like a rice seed bank. It's not like a barley seed bank. It's about dealing with everything from this to that.
Scientist Tim Pearce's enthusiasm is infectious.
The architecture on the outside of that seed is absolutely stunning.
The Millennium Seed Bank has gathered over 2 billion seeds from about 40,000 species, barely 16% of what's out there. They are itemised, identified, vacuumed and X-rayed, and most important, they're allowed to dry in specially dehumidified air-locked rooms.
So we know that for every 5% moisture they lose, we double their life expectancy. So we know as we start getting moisture out of the seed, its life expectancy goes up. Really important.
In tiny glass vials with a pouch of silica gel, the world's inheritance is being kept safe below ground at minus 20 degrees. Any surplus becomes the focus of more learning.
We know more about that brassica collection now than we did yesterday. And it constantly goes on. Every step of the process, from collecting to cleaning to X-raying to germinating, we're growing that knowledge about, and then you multiply that with all those species that we've got in the seed bank. So it's this growing bank of knowledge as well as a growing bank of material. That's what I like.
It's easy to see a seed bank as simply storage, a kind of black box for the future, but that really undersells the idea, because it's more about living conservation, research, about adaptability, about refreshing the planet as we go along. And that's why the international dimension is so important. Excess seeds are germinated and the results shared with 100 partners worldwide, from Mexico to China.
What we need to hear from these two conventions this year is a consolidated global effort to respond to the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis. And we have to do that in a collective, because then you're sharing knowledge, you're shortening the length of time before you can make an intervention if you have trained enough people.
As the world degrades under a changing climate, these banks will become crucial to drive regeneration and regrowth. Resources for that will be a matter of government policy. Another reason why COPs 15 in Kunming and 26 in Glasgow are so important. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Sussex.
China's President Xi Jinping has held a farewell meeting with outgoing German Chancellor Angela Merkel. President Xi thanked her for her contribution to China-Germany relations. Merkel said she will continue working to promote understanding between China and Germany and the rest of Europe. She reiterated that the EU should pursue an independent China policy.
Police have clashed with ethnic Serbs in Kosovo in raids targeting illegal smuggling gangs. The authorities say one person has been shot and 6 police officers injured after the operation in the city of Mitrovica.
Well, we haven't heard the B word for a while, but Brexit is back. The EU is expected to offer concessions to the UK to ease the transit of goods to Northern Ireland, as both sides prepare for a new round of post-Brexit talks.
The UK says the deal struck as part of the withdrawal process is not working and wants to change it to allow goods to circulate across the border more freely.
Our correspondent Giles Gibson is in Brussels. So, Giles, an EU press conference now underway. What are we expecting to come out of it?
Well, European Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič is currently giving a briefing here in Brussels. He's talking about a new set of proposals for the Northern Ireland Protocol, calling it a package of enhanced opportunities. A little bit of Brussels speak for you there. What the European Commission is proposing in relation to the protocol is to cut customs paperwork in half for goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. They're also proposing to reduce the numbers of checks on retail products such as sausages that are going into Northern Ireland. Sausages have become a real symbol of this entire dispute, in the British press at least. Of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol is a key part of the Brexit agreement, and what it meant is that Northern Ireland kept certain EU rules for things like food standards, meaning that there wouldn't be a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. However, this set of proposals, which is being laid out here in Brussels as we speak, could really fall short of what the UK government are looking for in terms of renegotiating the protocol. We heard from Lord Frost, who's a British government minister, and he is also actually, or he was, the chief negotiator for Brexit from the UK side. He made a speech on Tuesday in the Portuguese capital, Lisbon, in which he said that the protocol is not working and that there needs to be a new protocol. So certainly the UK side is that they don't want to just tinker with this arrangement, they want to completely renegotiate it.
Well, Giles, let's look ahead to these post-Brexit talks then. What's likely to come out of them?
Well, what we're hearing from both sides is that they are open to some negotiations. They're opening to trying to find a solution for this. EU officials are actually travelling to London this week to start these negotiations. But there is one issue in particular which could really become a logjam for all these talks in general, and that's the issue of the legal authority that oversees the Northern Ireland Protocol. Under the original agreements, the legal authority that oversees it is the European Court of Justice, the ECJ. However, Lord Frost, in his speech on Tuesday in the Portuguese capital, talked about bringing in international arbitration, so instead of the ECJ. Now, of course, we'll have to see exactly what the EU proposed as this speech goes on, really, as we speak. But certainly the feeling here in Brussels is that the European Commission are just not going to be prepared to get rid of that oversight of the Northern Ireland Protocol by the ECJ. So, if you like, that's really just a red line that the European Commission are just not going to cross.
Giles Gibson in Brussels, thank you.
Poland is planning to spend $400 million building a wall along its border with Belarus. Warsaw started putting up a barbed wire fence along the border in August, but the new wall will have motion sensors and cameras. All this follows a surge in the number of migrants trying to cross Poland to reach Germany. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Penelope Lierch in Budapest for us. Penny, the plans are being debated by Poland's National Assembly. How likely is it to gain support?
Well, Jamie, we've seen some opposition politicians in Poland very vocal on this issue, particularly around not only the migrant policy, but getting aid to a group of migrants that have been stuck in no man's land between Poland and Belarus for around 2 months now. The public mood as well. There have been people protesting for quite a few months on and off. We saw recently on the weekend another protest near the border calling for aid, particularly for that group of migrants that are trapped in no man's land, but also for a change in migrant policy. But the Polish government has stood very firm on this issue. They really want to see this migration and the pressure on their border from Belarus stopped. Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, these EU governments all accuse Minsk of deliberately flying in different migrants from areas like Afghanistan and Iraq and then deliberately driving them towards the EU borders. We saw President Lukashenko of Belarus last month speaking about this issue, saying that he wants to see people helped, calling it a humanitarian catastrophe, but there have been no diplomatic talks at this point. And from the Polish side, the number of crossings are only growing more. They say that although that 180-kilometre barbed wire fence has been built, there's been an increase in the number of attempted crossings, around 8,000 attempted crossings recorded according to Polish officials within the last 2 months. So that's why they're now looking at this wall, which would cost more than $400 million and be equipped with sensors and motion cameras to try and keep a lid on the number of people trying to come across and perhaps decrease the number of personnel that are on the ground at the moment. Jamie, we know there are thousands of police, military and border guards in that area.
Penny, winter's coming. Can you give us a sense of what's going on at the border at the moment?
Well, Well, Jamie, the situation on the border is growing increasingly treacherous for those who are trying to cross. We know at least 5 people have reported to have passed away in the border area within the last month or so. That group who are trapped in no man's land, 32 people have been calling for more aid as they struggle with illnesses, particularly as the temperature drops. There's a state of emergency in place that has been in place since the beginning of September, and the Polish government has recently extended that for an extra 60 days, the longest that they can extend it. Now, that doesn't have great support from the public. Less than half of people surveyed in a recent poll actually support that action by the government, but it means that the media, aid groups and opposition politicians cannot get anywhere near this border, perhaps to report back on exactly what's going on. At least those who oppose these particular measures are saying that it is a way of covering up what exactly is happening on the border. We know as well tensions are rising. One of the diplomats from Poland recently speaking to his EU counterparts, raising this issue again of increased pressure on the border, also claiming that Belarusian officials have fired at Polish officials, not using live ammunition, but those tensions are certainly rising, with Belarus accused of trying to smuggle more people across this border as well. Jamie?
Penelope Lierch in Budapest, thank you very much.
Austria's opposition parties have joined forces to agree on the formation of a parliamentary inquiry into allegations of corruption against former Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. The inquiry will run alongside a criminal investigation. Johannes Pleshberger reports.
The scandal surrounding ex-Chancellor Sebastian Kurz has prompted cooperation amongst opposition political parties. 3 have joined forces to agree that the allegations must be subject to a parliamentary inquiry, which will run alongside their criminal inquiry into Kurz and his team. That investigation concerns allegedly falsified opinion polls in which the former Chancellor was portrayed in a particularly positive light, with government funds then spent to ensure these polls were reported in a local free newspaper. On Tuesday, a first arrest was made in the case. Meanwhile, the wheels of government continue to turn. Finance Minister Gernot Blümel of the ruling People's Party, which governs in a coalition with the Green Party, has presented a budget. It includes a so-called eco-social tax reform, one of the coalition's main projects. The draft budget suggests lower taxes for low and medium-income households to counterbalance a new tax on CO2 emissions, which is likely to result in high fuel and heating costs. After high government spending due to the pandemic, Blümel is aiming for an almost break-even budget by 2025. However, he said everyone is responsible for the pace of economic recovery, calling on all those who had not yet had the COVID-19 vaccine to get the jab. He told the parliament immunization also protects jobs. The opposition criticized the budget for putting workers and pensioners at a disadvantage. While the government gets on with its work, it remains to be seen how stable the alliance will be. There is speculation that the Green Party could walk away from the coalition if more damaging revelations come to light. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, hundreds more people forced to flee home as volcanic eruptions continue to bring chaos to the Spanish Canary Islands.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is planning his fourth visit to La Palma after the latest volcanic eruptions on the island. Rahul Pathak reports.
Now well into its fourth week, the Cumbre Vieja volcano is still causing havoc. Over 800 people had to be evacuated from parts of the coastal area of Los Llanos de Aridane. Residents of La Laguna were also given just a few hours to collect their belongings before being asked to leave by the emergency services.
I am removing all the possessions from my aunt's house before this demon arrives here. The lava path flows to my aunt's and grandparents' houses, so we have to get out while we can because you can't fight against nature.
I can feel the danger coming towards us. We have to evacuate. All the neighbors have to evacuate before it arrives. If not, we just wouldn't have time.
The partial collapse of the cone of the northern side of the volcano has allowed the lava to find a new path that reached an industrial area called El Callejón de la Gata. The lava flow caused a fire and gas explosion at a local cement plant, which emitted potentially toxic gases and prompted the emergency services to confine thousands to their homes. Now, the lava flow has covered more than 650 hectares of farms, homes and other buildings. It's also destroyed 1,400 homes, changing many lives forever. Now, the new path of the lava looks set to cause even more destruction with no immediate end in sight.
The latest seismic activity shows us where the possible lava reserves are located underground. From this, it seems there is a deep reserve that's feeding the eruption. We can't calculate its capacity, but we can assume that it will stay like this for some time to come.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was scheduled to visit the island on Wednesday to assess the latest developments and has already pledged over $230 million as part of a recovery plan. The money will be used to help rebuild houses, restart businesses and fix the infrastructure. The ongoing uncertainty and the psychological effect this natural disaster has placed on the residents may take longer to heal. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
And finally, Star Trek actor William Shatner has made history, becoming the oldest person to go into space. The 90-year-old blasted off from Texas on board Blue Origin's New Shepard spacecraft. It was the company's second human spaceflight after founder Jeff Bezos fulfilled his childhood dream of going into space in July. Mr. Shatner, who played Captain Kirk in the original Star Trek television series, experienced several minutes of weightlessness during the 11-minute flight. He and his fellow passengers were greeted by Amazon founder Mr. Bezos at the landing site.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We are on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, cgtn.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.